think this is our sixth session of talking about Qohelet, and now we are in chapter 7. We read the two first verses last week. Tov Shem Mishem Tov V'yom HaMavet Miyom HaValedo. A good name is better than precious oil, and the day of death than the day of one's birth. Meaning that when one is born, we don't know what this person is going to be. But at the day of death, this is where you could look back and understand the history of that person. The second pasuk, it says, Tov lechet el bet avel, milechet el bet mishteh b'asher hu sof kol ha'adam, ve'achai ten libo. It is better to go to a house of mourning than to a house of festivity, but not because you want to suffer, but rather it says, b'asher hu sof kol ha'adam. When you go to the mourner's house, you realize that our life here on earth is finite. And therefore, the living will lay it to his heart, meaning that we will take it to heart and change our ways. The next might be a bit harsh, but the next three pasukim are connected and somehow related also to pasuk bet. Tov ka'as mishok ki bero'a panim yitav lev, lev chachamim bevet evel velev kesilim bevet simcha. טוב לשמוע גערת חכם מאיש שומע שיר כסילים. Anger is better than laughter, because when your countenance is sad, your heart will rejoice. The heart of the wise people is in the house of mourning, and the heart of the fool is in the house of festivity. טוב לשמוע גערת חכם. It's better to hear the rebuke of the wise men from hearing the song of fools. So some people connect those pesukim to the statement in Mishlei, Hosech shivto soneh beno. If you hold back your staff and your rod and you don't discipline your child, you're actually causing him trouble. And unfortunately, a lot of people misunderstood that idiom, that statement, to think that they should be harsh or disciplinarian with their children. It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean physical discipline or physical power, and not even emotional power. The relation between a parent and child should be one of love, and if there is reverence, the reverence is not fear of the parents, but rather fear of losing the relationship that they have. That's yirah me'ahava. It's concern that stems out of love. When there is love and support in the household, in the family, a child would not want to do something that upset his parents. But it has to be done really with understanding, not manipulating the child. It's a very difficult thing to do. The only thing that we can achieve from being disciplinarians and acting with force, or telling the child you have to do so because I said so, is to convey the message that whoever is stronger rules, and give the child that concept that the child will think, okay, when I'll be stronger, I'll do whatever I want. So I think what the way we should understand Qohelet could be that the words of Qohelet are influenced by the culture of the times, but also it is possible, the way I understand Qohelet, he speaks about the Ga'arat Hacham is the key here, the rebuke of the wise versus the song of fools. And that means that criticism is important. As much as we want unconditional love and support, it doesn't mean that we agree with everything that another person does. But we should know what kind of relationship we have, and how far can we go with our criticism to not completely burn bridges, or to make sure that the other side is listening. In many cases, when parents talk to children, and even when they start with the phrase, I only say it because I love you, there's like a metal door, that comes rolling down, shuts the child off from the parent, and they don't want to hear anything. But the rebuke is, when possible, that's what I've learned from experience, is sometimes letting people learn by experience. They want to do something, as long as it's not dangerous, say yes. Say yes, let them try. If you always say no, then they always think, well, I could have done that. If they try it and they see that it didn't work out, then they realize that then a person could realize that this is not something that they want, and then you could talk about it, talk about the experience. Another tool in education is validating a child's fears or concerns or desires by saying that you also had that, or other great people had that, not making him feel like someone who stands out or weird or is out of the ordinary. So those are certain steps that we can take, and I think that's what Qohelet is trying to say here. We have to look at the full picture of what life is and understand the consequences. That the actions that we take can affect other people, can cause sorrow and sadness, and it's better to stop before things get out of control. That's my thought on these psukim. Let's continue. This is a wordplay in Hebrew. Sirim is a thorny plant, dry thorns. It's called in Hebrew sira kotzanit. And people used to gather them to use as a wood firewood. And when you burn them, they crackle. They make a lot of noise. So it says, says the laughter, it doesn't mean laughter as mockery. Laughter of the fool, someone who praises you for everything you do. This is like this sound of the burning wood under the pot, and maybe also refers to the fact that they burn fast and don't produce a lot of heat. So it's not really something that is worthwhile and permanent. Ki ha'oshek yeholel hacham v'abeded lev matana, because oppression turns a wise man into a fool, and that means, I think it means oshek in the sense of shohad, of bribery. If you let yourself be bribed, that will distort your judgment. And bribe doesn't necessarily have to be money; it could be also false praise. V'abeded lev matana, and gifts will cause you also to lose direction. Actually, that's something that my grandfather used to emphasize a lot, and I have a little note that he gave me when it was Tafshin Mem Aleph. Tafshin Mem Aleph was in 1981, so I was 16 at the time. He gave me a book or something, maybe a shofar that I have here. I forgot what year was it. It was a year before he passed away, and he wrote me a beautiful blessing, and then he signed. The year was Hatashma, Hey Tafshin Mem Aleph, and the way he signed it was he made it into an acronym that stands for Heyet Tamid Soneh Matnot Adam. So he gives me a gift, and he says, but always, don't. He doesn't say like hate. You should hate gifts, not meaning gifts that you get from friends and family, but those kind of gifts that try to influence you in your decision making process. And I think that's what he means here. And he sees the praise by the fool as also something that could distort you and distort your judgment and lead you in wrong directions. We continue with let's continue back to Pesukim. Tov aharit davar mereshito, tov erech ruach migeva ruach. Al tevahel beruchacha lichos, ki kaas behek kesilim yanuach. This seems like connected in a way, but also it's an anthology of idioms that are related to the first statement of Tov lechet el bet ha'avel milechet el bet ha'mishteh. When you go to a house of festivity, you live the moment. When you go to the house of mourning, you have a perspective of present, past, present, future. Here also it says, better is the end of the thing than the beginning, because at the end you know that you've accomplished something. In the beginning, You don't know yet how this is going to unfold. Also, some interpret it as tov ahari davar mereshito. When does something end well? When you started in the right way. But I think that the original intention of Qohelet was that at the end, when you look back, you could see the full picture. So it's also good. It's good advice, bereshit, in the beginning, to project the full process to be able to get there. And therefore, it says, Tov erech ruach migevar ruach. Patience is better than arrogance. Because the arrogant person would rush to take action when it is not necessary, to show that he is capable of doing that. And the patient person will wait for things to unfold and for the right moment to come. I think I probably mentioned this book once in the past. One is a sort of a quirky book that I know I bought on a whim because the title interested me. It's called Encyclopedia Idiotica, and it's a collection of story, of anecdotes in history where leaders and generals, people in all different positions made hasty decisions that destroy them or their companies or nations. Really, when you look back, you say you could have waited a couple more minutes, days, months, whatever it was, and not be in that situation. Read the situation well, and I think that is something that Qohelet suggests here. There are no comments or questions here. I'll continue to the next pasuk. Al tevahel beruchacha lichos, ki ka'as behek kesilim yanuach. That became an idiom in Hebrew. The last four words. Ka'as behek kesilim yanuach. Don't be hasty to be angry, because anger rests in the bosom of fools. Sort of like almost a visual picture of a baby being cradled by someone that and I think it's an interesting analogy, because holding a baby for many people provides comfort and calmness, and anger is the exact opposite. But anger can become addictive. When people get angry, the body is flooded with toxins. When we calm down, there's the detox process is done by pumping more toxins into our body, and some people get used to this process and enjoy it. So Qohelet says, if someone enjoys that person is a fool. This is not something that in the long term can benefit us. Al tomar mehaya שהימים הראשונים היו טובים מאלה, כי לא מחוכמה שאלת על זה. Now, this, by the way, for those of you who are Hebrew speakers, it sounds like very, very modern Hebrew, right? שהימים הראשונים היו טובים מאלה, כי לא מחוכמה שאלת על זה. I mean, it's not all of it is modern Hebrew, right? I know, but it sounds pretty much like spoken Hebrew, right? And that's because, I remember I told you that Qohelet most probably is a late book in the Tanakh. Some say even 3rd century BCE. So after almost 200 years after they returned to Eretz Israel. And here we see some of those elements. In the biblical language, you don't find this she hayamim harishonim. Usually it would be asher or ki, but not she hayamim harishonim. That's a later development of Hebrew. But what does he say here? Do not say, how was it that former days were better than those? Ki lo mechokma sha'alta al zeh. This is not out of wisdom. I think we should assume that Qohelet is not rejecting the study of history. The study of history is extremely important in Judaism and the Tanakh. The Torah actually present that idea, and historians like Paul Johnson say that that was actually a concept that was introduced to the world by the Israelites or by Judaism. That was not that common, the idea of the historical development from past to the future. But rather what Qohelet says is, don't fall into the nostalgic trap of thinking that the past was better than the present. This is an escape. To say that the past was better than the present is to escape the present to a some kind of imagined reality that existed in the past.
Rabbi
Now,
Ovadia.
yes,
Isn't this also consistent with the whole theme of Dor Kam v'Dor Ba Vein Chadash Tachat Hashamesh? That
yes.
essentially, it never gets better, never gets worse. It's all
It,
repetitive, cyclical, and
yeah, it's always you have to deal with what you have, what is given to you. And in each generation, you have your struggles and you have difficulties. Uh, but yeah, we tend to hear that all the time. When oh, where are the good old days? I think if you Google the in any religious database, the words this generation, right? Rabbis love saying that in this generation, in those difficult times, it's always like today is terrible. In the past, everybody was religious, everybody was observant, everybody respected their parents, right? I was thinking about it today, actually, as we are going like through the 3 weeks, and I'm where we commemorate the destruction of the temples, and I recall that famous statement, midrashic statement that is always taught in all the Orthodox circles, yeshivot, schools, etc., which is that the first temple was destroyed because of Giloy Arayot Shfichut Damim Ve'avodah Zarah, because they committed adultery, idolatry, and murder. But the second temple, they were so righteous. So what was the problem? The problem was sinat hinam, was baseless hatred, right? So, in a way, think of it. It's ridiculous to say it. I'm sorry, because sinat hinam, baseless hatred, right? If the people of the first temple did murder and idolatry and adultery, there's no greater hate than that. The rabbi somewhere claimed they were Yirei Shamayim. They wanted to do good, but they had such a strong desire to do sin that they could not fight their Yetzer Hara. But that is again is an escape. Is to say we are, the first generation was so great, and we're just lost that quality. It's almost like accepting defeat and saying we are not capable of facing our challenges. Lichora, however, one could have argued that the whole Torah, our whole worldview, is built on nostalgia, because we all started from Gan Eden, and we're trying to go back to Gan Eden, right? So that is true. I mean, but remember that this Gan Eden existed in such a far removed from us time, what some people call the primordial times, the time before time, that it never existed in our reality. That's how we have to see it. And I would say even more, the Gan Eden is a myth. If we read it clearly, the comparison of the two stories of Bereshit, the first chapter and the second chapter, we realize that none of them should be taken literally. Rather, the story of Gan Eden is told to us to give us hope, to say there is a possibility to live better life. And how do you live better life? By following the Torah. And that's why when Adam and his wife are expelled from Gan Eden, God puts the tree of life there, guarded by the Keruvim, to tell them this is what you need. You need to find Eitz Haim, which is the Torah, guarded by Keruvim, just like the Torah in the Mishkan, in the Ark, was guarded by the Keruvim. So nostalgia is good, but not if it leads you to sink in depression and say, I'm suffering today, it's so horrible, the life of my parents, grandparents 100 years ago, or me as a child was so much better. Instead, the positive power of nostalgia is saying, I believe that in the past we had a better time, and I want to bring that time back. And that's also why we break a glass under the chuppah, and we say, "Im eshkachech Yerushalayim tishkach yemini." If I forget you, Yerushalayim, let my right hand be forgotten. We're saying we want to bring back those days. I always tell the couple when I do weddings. I had one, as you all know, we had one wedding during that I officiated at during the Zoom times, and hopefully we'll get back to being able to celebrate properly with friends and relatives around. But the thought that I would like to share, that I like to share with them, is this: right now you're in a moment of tremendous joy, like the Bet HaMishteh that is mentioned at the beginning of this chapter in Qohelet, and in that moment, we tend to think that the rest of the world just dissipated. Nothing exists, right? We are in our bubble of joy. And the Torah reminds us that the world is imperfect. We're still a long way to go. So by breaking the glass and reminding ourselves that there is suffering out there, we make a commitment, the couple, the family, everybody who's sharing the joy, to take a little bit of our joy and share it with others. And this way, every wedding becomes a stepping stone in the process of Tikkun Olam. Okay, so I'm going back to Qohelet, and he says this: Tova Chochma im Nahala veyoter leroei hashamesh, ki b'tzel החוכמה בצל הכסף, ויתרון דעת החוכמה תחיה בעליה. Wisdom is good with an inheritance, and even more to those who see the sun. Ki b'tzel hachokma b'tzel hakasef, because if you sit in the shade of wisdom, you sit in the shade of money. V'yitron da'at hachokma tehayeh be'alea, and the greater wisdom you have, that will make you survive. How do you understand those pesukim? I wonder. I would like to hear from you. How do you understand those pesukim where he says wisdom is good with inheritance, more so to those who see the sun, and then that to be in the shade of wisdom is in the shade of money, and the excellency of knowledge, or the more knowledge you have, the better you will live, the better you'll survive.
I think it's
compare with the previous statements that he made. Yes, Yedidia?
No, I was saying I believe, or the way I understand it is that it's good to have wise people around you, people who you could who are close to, where wisdom is accessible. So it can, the analogies of the sun and the shade can be, your parents and those who are close to you. And the inheritance is that what you get from you get from your parent. And I wanted to say something to what you was speaking of about us, and looking at certain, like the days of yore, and and how times people look at it as things have gotten worse. But I believe in Yirmiyahu it kind of talks about that a little bit, that say you've done worse than your fathers, when it talks about how the nations look and wonder why they're in the position that they're in, and they think that maybe our parents had have done worse than them, but really they done worse than their own parents. And the idea is kind of presented in Yirmiyahu. And it's funny that you mentioned about the chuppah, about breaking the glass, because my son recently was had a bar mitzvah, and it was a question of whether or not to do tachanun. Most of them don't do tachanun on a bar mitzvah, and some communities do. And I try to make a correlation of the chuppah, that because you break the glass, it's supposed to represent that everything is not going to always be great, and that even with tachanun, it's letting to me, the bar mitzvah boy, know that no matter what he may experience in life, he should never feel that he can't come into a shul, learn, put on tefillin. He should never be that so far removed, based on whatever his circumstances is, or his shortcomings may be. He should never. And it was funny because one of the rabbis told me that, and that same idea comes from some Hasidic thought.
Interesting, beautiful, and Mazal Tov for your son's bar mitzvah.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Yes, I like that idea, that approach. Nathaniel, you wanted to say also?
Yeah, my dad used to say it over and over like a mantra when I was growing up. Money is a defense. Money is a defense. And he never would explain it, but he always was just trying to make a point that you need to go out and get a good job.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
From the time I was 14 years old, I started working. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. So I'm asking, it was quoting
but I always,
Qohelet.
right from this verse. Yeah, he always would quote this verse, and so I went out and I started working very early. I started working at 14, but it always puzzled me a little bit because there was so much spoken about in Mishle about how wisdom is better than silver and gold and how it's more profitable than riches and with money. And I feel like if you look at it practically speaking, it's just saying money is good to have to protect yourself in a world that runs on currency. But I did always have a internal struggle with reading Mishle and then hearing this verse and my dad drilling it into my head. Money's defense. So
very interesting. I'll tell you, that's why I was asking you, because I think maybe this verse is being said either sarcastically or with cynicism, because later on he speaks about the importance of chokhmah, but I think it's in chapter 8 that he says chokhmata misken bezuya, the wisdom of the misken, of the poor person is rejected. People do not hear. You see, in chapter 9, verse 15 or 16, he says, "Chokhmat misken bezuya udvarav enam nishma'im." The poor man's wisdom is despised, and his words are not heard. So it could be that now he's speaking bitterly. Now that's not Qohelet, the king, is someone who was very wise, but his wisdom was not appreciated. And he says, you know why? Because I don't have nahala. I'm not wealthy, so people are not listening to me. I didn't see that in the commentaries, but I have the feeling that the Roya Shamesh, people who see the sun, are the opposite of the people who toil under the sun. People who work under the sun are always bent down. They work. They can't look up and see the sun and enjoy the beauty of nature. They always, their faces in the field, in the building, in construction. They have to keep working under the taskmaster. So he says, if you are wise but you're enslaved or oppressed, what good does it do? And then he adds, "B'tzela chokma, b'tzela kasef." To be wise is to have that influence and affluence. So maybe that comes from that place. But he also adds vitron da'at hachokmat hachaye be'alea, that he understands that da'at, wisdom, could be a possession that is precious more than anything else. And that reminds me of an interesting mashal. I think it's a famous mashal analogy in rabbinic literature, but something that I was later corroborated for me by an article in one of the financial writers, and that was when the internet bubble burst in the early 2000s, and now again we see the same thing, where the author said that the greater possession that you have, that anyone has, is not his inheritance or wealth or anything like that, but rather his knowledge. Your knowledge, your skills, your talents, this is the greatest possession that you have, because you could take it anywhere. And we've seen it through this crisis. People who managed the most powerful industries are not where they used to be. Things have changed overnight. Not that people who are at the bottom are going up, but what counts now, for many cases, is more knowledge than other things. And the mashal that I recall, the story that I recall from rabbinic literature, is they say this a scholar was traveling in a ship with several merchants, and probably the story took place in the coast of the Mediterranean. This is where the rabbis and merchants sailed from North Africa to the shores of Europe and back to Israel. So the merchants were talking, and each one of them brags about his merchandise, whether a garment or jewelry, whatever it is. And then they turn to the scholar and they say, "Where is your merchandise?" And he says, "I have no merchandise with me." And they mock him. They say, like, "Chokhmata misken bezuya," really, you have nothing. And then they're shipwrecked, and they manage to survive. They get to shore, and they lost all of their merchandise in the when the ship went down. So the people of the town come and take them in, and they say, "What do you have to offer? Like, how can we help you?" I say, I used to be a jeweler, right? I used to have jewelry. Now it's all at the bottom of the sea. I used to have garments, right, etc. But then they talk to the scholar and they see his scholarship and say, "Oh, you could be our teacher. You could be our mentor." So I found that interesting, mashal, and somehow related to this pasuk in Qohelet. So as I said, today we're going to do the shorter. We're going to finish now, and Be'ezrat Hashem next time continue from that chapter.